Okay, he says he can't get on audio.
Yep.
Just type in the chat. Okay. I'll ask him, should we just start? Okay, he says it's live right now. Okay.
Yeah.
So I'll just start off with the introduction, and then you want to just, okay, sorry.
Yep, we can do that.
Okay. So David Kelly is an established children's book author, travel writer, and technology analyst. He's the author of the Ballpark Mystery series, in which cousins Kate and Mike solve mysteries at different major league ballparks.
Thank you very much, Sarah. It's great to be here with you this afternoon. And I am David A. Kelly, as she mentioned. I'm the author of the Ballpark Mystery books. These are chapter books, great for kids in grades 1 through 5, and they're mysteries set in baseball stadiums. They follow the adventures of the two main characters, Kate and Mike, who are cousins. They travel to different baseball stadiums to see a game or take a tour, and then they encounter a mystery. Starts off in Boston at the Red Sox Fenway Park Stadium, where Mike and Kate are watching batting practice, and they're watching the star hitter Big D hit a whole bunch of home runs. And then at the end of the first chapter, his lucky bat gets stolen. So Mike and Kate have to figure out what happened to Big D's missing bat. And then the characters, Mike and Kate, go to a bunch of other baseball stadiums. The most recent one is the Colorado Curveball. I'm going to read a little bit of this book to you shortly. This takes place in Denver, Colorado at the Colorado Rockies Stadium. And it's a fun book. It's the 16th team book. And then it's actually the 20th book overall in the series, because we have a couple of super specials. We have 4 super specials that take place, like the World Series, a Subway Series, a Little League World Series, and a Christmas in Cooperstown book. So that's the Ballpark Mystery series that I've written. I've also written another series of books called the MVP, or Most Valuable Players. And these are similar chapter books, again, great for kids in elementary school. And these are basically mysteries with other sports. So there's a school Olympics mystery, a soccer mystery, a football mystery, and a basketball mystery. So again, if you kind of like different sports or mysteries, those are great books. And I've also written 2 nonfiction books. And the first nonfiction book I wrote was called Babe Ruth and the Baseball Curse. This tells a story of a really famous baseball player by the name of Babe Ruth. He played about 100 years ago, and he was famous for hitting a lot of home runs. He started off playing for the Boston Red Sox, but after 3 years, they traded him to another team, the New York Yankees. And at that point, the Yankees were actually not a very good team, but after they got Babe Ruth, they started to be a great team. They started to win a lot of World Series. And the Red Sox had a lot of bad luck and couldn't win any World Series. So that book tells the story of Babe Ruth and the Boston Red Sox. The second nonfiction book I've written is this one called Miracle Mud. It's a picture book with lots of cool baseball pictures inside that look like this. Here we go. And it tells the story of this stuff. Lena Blackburn Baseball Rubbing Mud. So this is a tub, and inside is some nice brown mud. So it turns out this mud gets rubbed on every Major League Baseball before a game. So if you've ever seen a Chicago Cubs game or a White Sox game or a Boston Red Sox game or Yankees game in person on TV, before every game, someone on the clubhouse staff has to rub 75 or 80 baseballs with this special mud. And this special mud comes from a secret place in New Jersey. Nobody knows where it is except the mud farmer who goes out and collects it. So it's kind of a weird story. That's because every brand new Major League Baseball is made out of white leather, and the leather can have a little bit of a shine or a gloss to it, and that can make it hard for the pitchers to hold on to. They want to be able to get a good grip and throw it hard, and if the ball is slippery or glossy or shiny, they can't do that. So for a long time, baseball players tried to find a way to take the shine or the gloss off of a baseball. They tried things like soaking them in water, but that made the baseballs too wet. They tried things like rubbing it with dirt from the field, but that made the baseballs too dark and hard to see. They tried things like spit or tobacco juice, which is kind of gross or smelly. And then along came a player by the name of Lena Blackburn, who was fishing one day behind his house in New Jersey. and he stepped in some mud, and the mud gave him an idea. He took the mud back to the baseball stadium. He took some, he rubbed it on the baseball like this and let it dry, and it worked. The mud was just gritty enough that it took the shine or the gloss off the baseball without making him too wet or soggy or dark or stinky or smelly. And so for the past 75 years, all the major league teams have used that special mud on their baseballs. And I thought that was kind of a weird story that not a lot of people knew about. And that's one of the fun things about being an author is you get to kind of research interesting stories or make up interesting stories and then find a way to turn them into a book and share them with people. So that's a real quick overview to the books I've written. And what I thought I'd do now is actually share a little bit of this first book, the latest Ballpark Mysteries book, The Colorado Curveball, with you. And again, I thought I'd read a little bit of this to you and then maybe show you some slides if we have time about the book, because you'll see, actually, you know what? Let me show you the slides first, and then I'll read the book to you. That's probably the better order. So if I can share my screen, I'm going to try to share this and show you a little bit about the Colorado Rockies Stadium. So here we go. Oops, there we go. Come on. So you should see a slide with all my books. Those are the books that I just talked through. The Ballpark Mystery books are on the left. The Super Specials are on the right. And then below that are the MVP books, and then the 2 nonfiction books that I've written. And again, you can read these books in any order, so you don't have to read them in numerical order. So what I was telling you about was the Colorado Curveball. So this is the latest book in the Ballpark Mystery series. It came out in February. I'm real excited about it. It's a lot of fun. You'll notice the color purple on the cover, and that's because the Colorado Rockies team color is purple. And I really like how the illustrator Mark Mayers incorporated purple on the cover. And the purple comes from the song America the Beautiful. You've probably heard it before. And somewhere in that song, there's a line, Purple Mountain Majesties, which you're probably familiar with. That actually refers to the Colorado Rocky Mountains, specifically Pikes Peak. When the song was written, it referred to Pikes Peak in Colorado. The Colorado Rockies took that as the inspiration for their team color purple. And the other thing you'll probably notice about the cover is that it's baseball, but it's snowing. So I have my main characters on the cover. Mike and Kate are playing kind of snow baseball, which looks kind of like fun. And that's because a couple of years ago, the Colorado Rockies, during their opening day in April, they actually had a snowstorm. So here's a photo from that day. I think it was 2018. And they have one of their field people cleaning off the infield. That's a white tarp, but there is snow on it. You can see the snow on the grass closest to you. And they had to delay the start of the game by a couple of hours to clean up the snow. And I actually incorporated that into the first chapter of the Colorado Curveball. And actually at first pitch, the temperature was 27 degrees, so not exactly perfect baseball watching weather, but probably pretty good for one of these fans. I like this shot of the fans that were watching the game that day. Looks like the guy on the right was probably pretty comfortable with that temperature. So most of the baseball games are played with actually grass and a little bit warmer weather. So I wanted to show you a shot of the Colorado Rockies Stadium. Here's the stadium on a slightly better weather day. And this is before a game when the teams are warming up. And there's something interesting on the right-hand side of the picture up near the top of the seating area. You can kind of see a line of purple seats, and I'll show you a close-up of that. But that's actually kind of a special section of the ballpark. So you know that Colorado, Denver specifically, is kind of high up in the mountains. This row of purple seats that rings the top of the ballpark, it looks like it's about 4 or 5 rows from the very top, is actually marking specifically 1 mile above sea level. So that's 5,280 feet above sea level at that row of purple seats. And that's because the Denver is high above sea level. It's up in the Rocky Mountains, much higher than where I am. I'm calling you from Boston, so we're much closer to sea level. And that height actually has some implications for the Rockies as well as for my book. So here's a chart that shows you the elevation of all the different Major League Baseball stadiums. And you can see way over on the right, the Colorado Rockies Stadium is really high. This is in meters, so it's listing it as almost 1,600 meters, which should be about 5,200 feet. The next closest stadium is the Arizona Diamondbacks Stadium, and you can see that that's way far closer to sea level than the Colorado Rockies Stadium. And then all the stadiums over on the left are the ones along the coast and basically all at sea level. Now, that elevation has some implications, which we'll get back to in a minute. So the next shot I wanted to show you should see a shot of the scoreboard at Coors Field. That's where the Rockies play. And the scoreboard is it's a little bit interesting because it's shaped like the Rocky Mountains. So you got this nice shape at the top of it that kind of duplicates a mountain peak. And that's kind of nice. And then here's another shot of the scoreboard. But if you look a little bit behind the scoreboard, you can actually see, although it is cloudy, you can see the Rocky Mountains kind of in the background there. So off to the left and off to the right, you can see the Rocky Mountains. It's a beautiful ballpark to watch a game at and see a little bit of nature at the same time. So I mentioned that we're talking about an elevation of 5,200 feet, give or take, or 5,280 feet. And that has an implication on the baseball game, specifically on the baseballs. Baseball hit at that elevation versus one hit at sea level will actually travel farther, up to maybe 12 feet farther, according to this chart. So when the Rockies opened up their stadium, they actually had a problem because there were too many home runs being hit. Some people thought that it was because of air resistance. Since you're a mile higher than most of the other baseball stadiums, they thought that maybe the air was thinner and the balls would travel farther. That may have some factor into it, but a bigger factor is actually the moisture content of the baseballs. So it turns out that when you're at that elevation, the air is generally drier, and that dries out everything, including baseballs. It removes the moisture from them. And basically, when you remove the moisture from the leather or from the inside of the baseball, it makes it harder. And when the baseball is harder and it hits the bat, it's actually going to bounce with more energy, and it's going to bounce farther. So therefore, the ball is going to travel farther, and you're going to get a lot more home runs. So after a little while, the Rockies actually figured out a great way to fix this problem, because they couldn't have a baseball stadium that generated a lot more home runs than the rest of the stadiums in the league. They actually installed something called a humidor. You may have heard about it in regards to like cigars or something, but a humidor is a moisture controlled environment. They're kind of like a special refrigerator that keeps the moisture at a certain level in a room. And that enables them, here's an inside shot of the humidor with rows of boxes of baseballs to keep the baseballs basically at sea level, so that the moisture content and the moisture in here is similar to what you find at sea level. They were the first team to do that. Now some of the other teams, like the Arizona Diamondbacks, since they're the next highest baseball stadium, they're doing the exact same thing. So the other thing about Colorado is when I was out there, I actually researched these books before I write them. I traveled a little bit west of Denver and met a nice friend here. This is my dinosaur friend. Dinosaurs actually play a big part in Colorado and Denver, Colorado. And you can actually go west of Denver to see tracks from dinosaurs and fossils from dinosaurs at a place called Dinosaur Ridge. And it's really interesting. I tried to incorporate that into the book, and I didn't incorporate Dinosaur Ridge, but the Colorado Rockies Stadium, when they were building it, they actually discovered a dinosaur fossil under the Rockies, under the Rockies dugout. And that's why they actually, I'll get back to this, they made their mascot a dinosaur. So this is an example of the kind of tracks that you can see, and you can also see them out in the rocks. There's a nice area where you can walk and you can kind of see these fossilized remains of the tracks from the dinosaurs. And I did meet with the mascot for the Rockies and got approval for the book. He really likes it. Here is a shot of the Colorado Rockies mascot. His name is Dinger, and he gave it 2 or 3 horns up after reading the book. So I was happy with that as the author. And I think that's the last slide that I can share with you. And I'm going to come back. Here we go. So I thought if we have time, which I think we do, I can read a little bit of the Colorado Curveball to you. So the first chapter, so you'll get a feeling for how I incorporated those things that I saw on my research trip into the story. And then after that, I'm happy to take questions. So let me read a little bit from the first chapter. It's called Surprise on the Elevator. And there's a shot of Mike and Kate in Colorado at the Colorado Rockies Stadium. A surprise on the elevator. Kate Hopkins stuck out her tongue. Soft white flakes drifted into her mouth and instantly disappeared. Snow, she asked, on the opening day of baseball season? Don't worry, your cousin Mike Walsh replied. Big Bill, the Rockies pitcher, can definitely bring the heat. He'll need a flamethrower for this field, Kate said. You can't even see the grass or the baselines. Kate was right. The Colorado Rockies field was white with snow. It looked like the middle of winter, but it was early April. Mike and Kate were in Denver with Kate's father for the opening day game against the Los Angeles Dodgers. Maybe we can solve the mystery of the missing field, Mike said. Kate shook her head. We're pretty good detectives, she said, but I don't think the Rockies will need us to find the field. All they have to do is turn on the heater. Mike glanced around at the thousands of empty, snow-covered seats. He looked past the mountain-shaped scoreboard to the Rocky Mountains off in the distance. This place is huge, he said. There's no way they can heat it up fast enough. Kate smiled. I'm not talking about heaters for the stadium, she said. I'm talking about the heaters under the field. The Rockies installed over 45 miles of heating wires to keep the grass warm enough to grow since it gets so cold up here in the mountains. Fans wearing winter coats and hats had started to file into the stadium for the game. Down in the field, the grounds crew ran out to the infield with shovels. They started pushing piles of snow to the sides. Underneath, a big tarp covered the infield grass. Kate's dad, Mr. Hopkins, laughed quietly. Well, I guess I've seen it all now, he said. He was a scout for the Los Angeles Dodgers. He and Kate's mother were divorced, but they often invited Mike and Kate to meet him on his baseball trips. They had flown in that day from Cooperstown, New York, while he had traveled from his home in Los Angeles. Moments later, the sun peeked through the clouds. It lit up the snow and instantly made things feel warmer. The fluffy flakes at their feet started to melt. Mike used his sneaker to push some snow into a small pile. "Aw, why does it have to melt?" he asked. "If we had just a little bit more, we could have gone snowboarding and skiing right here." He jumped into a snowboard stance and held his arms out like he was cruising down a mountain. He bent back and forth as he pretended to carve through the snow. That would have been a real double play, baseball and snowboarding. Didn't you get in enough snowboarding yesterday?" Kate asked. The three of them had spent the day skiing and snowboarding west of Denver. You're the one who wanted to stop early in the afternoon. I didn't want to stop, Mike said. I just wanted to get some hot chocolate and rest. Here's a picture of Mike snowboarding in his stance there. Mr. Hopkins nodded. The altitude around here does tire you out more quickly unless you're used to it. That reminds me, look up there at that. He pointed to the row of purple seats that went all around the stadium near the top. The purple seats, Kate said. That row is exactly 1 mile above sea level. Mike stood up from his snowboard crouch. I can't wait to try sitting up there, he said. From 1 mile up, I should be able to see everything in the world. Mr. Hopkins laughed. It's 1 mile above sea level, Mike, he said, not 1 mile above everything else around here. A buzz came from Mr. Hopkins' pocket. He reached in and pulled out his phone. It's a message from the Rockies, he said. The game's been delayed by an hour because of the snow. I guess we should look around for some hot chocolate while we wait. With marshmallows, Kate said. They ran up the stairs to the main walkway and headed to the nearest food stand. Mr. Hopkins followed. Mike and Kate ordered hot chocolate while Mr. Hopkins bought a coffee. To keep warm, they walked around the stadium with their drinks. Mike slurped all his marshmallows first, while Kate stirred hers into the cocoa. I knew I should ask for extra marshmallows, Mike said. Mr. Hopkins' phone rang. Excuse me, he said. It's George. George was Mr. Hopkins' friend and the engineering manager for the Rockies. Mike and Kate continued sipping their drinks while Mr. Hopkins walked closer to the field with the phone. This is good, Kate said. She tilted the cup and finished her hot chocolate. Mike slurped up the last of his. He dropped the empty cup in a trash can and wiped the chocolate from the corner of his mouth. Now what? He asked. Kate's dad was still on the phone. How about a quick race now that we're fueled up? Kate asked. She pointed to the elevator at the far side of the entrance hallway. First one to push the button wins. Okay, go, Mike said. He took off running. Kate dashed after Mike and soon passed him. They ran neck and neck until they were just a few steps away from the elevator. Then Mike leapt forward and pressed the button. It lit up. I won, he panted. Kate stopped and nodded. Yep, she said softly. They were just about to turn and head back when the button flicked off. Ding! The elevator doors whooshed open. Mike and Kate stepped back. Roar! A deafening growl filled the area. Before Mike and Kate could move, a giant dinosaur came out of the elevator and headed straight for them. And that's the end of chapter 1. But I'll read a little bit of chapter 2 to you so we can complete the scene. Mike and Kate jumped back. The dinosaur charged forward. Roar! Kate grabbed Mike's arm. Hang on, she said. That's not a real dinosaur. That's Dinger. Dinger, the dinosaur, stopped in his tracks. His big head swiveled from Mike to Kate. Roar! He let out another loud bellow, but Kate stepped in front of him. Roar yourself, she said. We're not afraid. You went extinct over 65 million years ago. You're just a mascot for the Rockies. Dinger stopped charging at Mike and Kate. His head dropped. He leaned back and held out his hands. His arms were short and he had one small horn on his nose and 2 horns peeking out from the top of his head. He was purple from head to toe. There's a picture of Dinger. Look at that, Mike said. A purple triceratops. He nudged Kate. I think he wants to be friends. Dinger nodded. He reached out and shook hands with Mike and Kate. There are tons of dinosaur bones and fossils in Colorado, and some are worth a lot of money, like millions of dollars, Kate said to Mike. I read about them on the plane ride here. That's one of the reasons they made Dinger the dinosaur, their team mascot. Do you want to know the other reason they did that? Mike glanced at Dinger. The dinosaur held up his small hands and shrugged. No, Mike said. Because they found a triceratops bone when they built the ballpark, Kate said, right under the Rockies dugout. Dinger raised a hand to his mouth as if he was shocked. Mike smiled and reached out to Dinger for a high five. I'd say that's pretty cool, he said. Sounds like good luck to me. Dinger nodded happily. He gave Mike a high five and he danced around a little bit, swinging his tail out behind him and waving his short arms in the air. A woman next to Dinger motioned to her watch. Dinger bowed to Mike and Kate and waved goodbye as he followed the assistant off down the hall. We have to go too, Kate said. We're supposed to be meeting George. And that's all I can read for today. So if you want to figure out what happens to Dinger or what Mike and Kate find later on in the stadium, you can read the rest of the Colorado Curveball. So there you go. There's a quick introduction to some of the ballpark mysteries and the Colorado Stadium. So thanks for having me. And I think there might be a few questions. Actually, Sarah, do you have any questions?
Yeah. When did you decide to start writing?
So good question. When did I decide to start writing? I didn't decide to start writing till later on. Basically, when I was in school, I was a terrible writer. I hated to write. I could never think about what to write about. Never think about how to get started. My handwriting was really bad. My spelling was terrible. It's actually still terrible. And I never thought I'd actually write a book. Instead, I was kind of pretty good at math and science. So I ended up going to college for computer science and technology. And I got a job doing that kind of stuff for a while. And after a while, I had to start writing about computers and technology. And I discovered that I could learn to become a better writer if I worked at it, which I did. And I ended up writing a lot of articles and white papers and technology pieces about technology. And then I have 2 sons. And when they were younger, they were reading a lot of books. They were reading a lot of mystery books. They were reading a lot of sports books. And they were also playing a lot of baseball. And I thought it might be fun to try to write something creative and try to write a children's book. So that's how I came up with the idea for the ballpark mysteries. And that's why I started writing. But I didn't start that till I was about 40. So I think anyone can learn to become an author or a writer as long as they're willing to work at it. And I also think it's something you don't have to decide to do when you're in 3rd grade or 5th grade or 7th grade or 10th grade. Good question.
What advice would you give to an aspiring author?
What advice should I give to an aspiring author? I think there's a few things. I think you definitely need to be persistent. Writing, as is true with a lot of jobs, is hard. It's hard to do something creative, and I rarely do it right the first time. So you definitely need to be persistent. So I think that's perhaps one of the most important things to think about if you want to be a writer or a musician or kind of anything creative, because you have to come up with the idea, and you have to make it interesting to yourself, but then you have to share it with people. And that's the second piece. Is I think another really important thing about being an author or writer is sharing your work with others, getting some feedback, and then making changes. So the first time I write something like this, I can write something that I think is pretty good, but then I take it down to my wife or to my sons or to my editor, and they read it, and they find a lot of problems that I didn't see, or that I may not even agree with. But I realize if they're having trouble with what I'm writing, they don't understand it, it's not clear, or it's not interesting, I have to make it interesting and clear and fun for them, because then other people are going to write the work, or read the work. And so that's really important. So I'd say be persistent, and also get feedback from other people, and then adjust what you've done based upon that.
What hobbies do you have outside of writing?
What hobbies do I have outside of writing? I do spend a lot of time writing, and I do spend time researching the books and researching new books. But otherwise, I do still play catch. I don't play baseball, but I play catch with my sons. I like to take hikes and walks and do things like that. I like to travel. I used to be a travel writer. I haven't written any travel articles in a few years, but I've written travel articles for the New York Times and the Chicago Sun-Times and other newspapers. So I like to explore new places. I like to listen to music, go to concerts, that kind of stuff, go to movies. And I like to read. So I read a lot of history and biographies. I tend to prefer nonfiction books, but I'll read just about anything.
What do you travel for research for all of your books?
So great question. I do travel and do research for all the books. So all the ballpark mysteries I do. So again, I've written 20 of these. 16 of them are in different stadiums. And before I start writing, what I do is I do research here. I live outside of Boston. I do research based upon books that I find either in my library or the public library. I do internet searches, and then I'll travel. So for the Colorado curveball, I went out to Colorado for about 5 days 2 years ago, and I go to 2 baseball games or 3 baseball games, and I take a tour of the stadium just the way you would take a tour of the baseball stadium. And I take a lot of notes and a lot of pictures. Pictures actually on my phone are a really great way to remember details. So one of the challenges for me as an author is including details in the story. And for me, it's a lot easier to describe something that I've seen or that I'm seeing, rather than have to make up everything, because I have to make up the story, and that's a lot of work. So if I have pictures of what the people look like, when I go to Texas, I took pictures. The fans all wearing cowboy hats and big belt buckles and blue jeans and boots. And so they look different than the fans in Boston. And I want to be able to describe that. And then I'll also take tours in the city. I'll go around to different parts of the city, because possibly sometimes my characters, Mike and Kate, go outside the baseball stadium and do things in the city. And that's what I did in Chicago. The Chicago Cubs book is called The Wrigley Riddle, and this takes place at Wrigley Field. Some really cool things going on there. But I got Mike and Kate outside into Chicago, doing things in Chicago. They go to they talk about the Wrigley building. They go to what used to be the Sears Tower, and do some cool things in Chicago. So that's always fun to kind of do that research. But good question.
What are some of your upcoming projects?
So I'm working on more ballpark mystery books. I have a Minnesota Twins book coming out next year. It's a Minnesota Twins mystery. And then I'm working on an Atlanta Braves mystery. And I'm basically in the starting point of that. I've got 2 chapters done. I need to write about 8 more chapters. And I'm just at the point where I need to get into the clues. So I'm working on that this week. That'll take me probably another 3 weeks to come up with an outline. And I have some other projects I'm working on. I'm working on some other picture books. I've got a couple manuscripts that I've written that haven't sold. So that's one of the areas where, as a writer, I need to be persistent, because even though I think I've written a good story, I haven't found a publisher who wants to publish those stories. So I have some ideas for some other picture books. So I kind of keep generating new content, and hopefully some of it will sell as I go forward.
Do you have any COVID-19 tips, like staying busy during quarantine?
COVID-19 tips. Yeah, it's a little hard stuck in the house, as we all are. Here in Boston, the weather's gotten a little bit better, so we're able to go outside. And I think since I wrote about baseball, whatever you can do to stay healthy and stay active is really important. I've been playing catch with my son a little bit each day. Even 10 minutes out there is fun, just to throw the ball around and kind of get some exercise and clean air. And I'm also trying to read more. There's more time, and I can only spend so much time on screens, whether it's computer or the phone. So it's nice to kind of have a couple of books. And I usually read maybe 2 or 3 books at the same time, just because that allows me to not get bored. So I have a couple of books going, so I might suggest that. So a little bit of physical activity and a little bit of reading,
Thank you.
and washing your hands, of course.
Of course. What was the first book you ever wrote?
So the first book I ever wrote was an earlier version of this book, The Fenway Foul-Up, which is the Boston Red Sox mystery. As I told you, my sons were reading a lot of mysteries and reading a lot of sports books and playing a lot of baseball. And I thought, hey, there should be some baseball mysteries. And I thought it was a great idea, and nobody else had written any. So I read a bunch of children's books that are like this book, like the A to Z Mysteries by Ron Roy. And I tried to come up with a story. I came up with a story that was set at Fenway Park and the Boston Red Sox Stadium. And I spent a long time working on it. And finally, when I thought it was really good, I sent it in to an editor who I got an email. I got her contact information from an author. Sent it into an editor at Random House Publishing Company, New York City. And she read it and sent it back to me and said, yeah, it's terrible. No good. The mystery wasn't good. The characters were bad. It wasn't written well. The sentences were too long. The words were too hard. It was completely wrong, which was a little bit depressing to me because I'd put a lot of work into it and I really thought it was a good idea. But she actually said that she would look at it again if I revised it, and maybe fix some of the problems that she pointed out. And so I did that. I revised it. I worked on it for a couple of months. I thought it was really good. I sent it back in, and she read it again. And about a month later, I got another letter back from her. Again, it was terrible. She said it was awful. Even though the characters were a little bit better, the mystery wasn't any good. But she did say that she liked the way that I wrote the nonfiction book. As a nonfiction chapter, I had some nonfiction information in the back of the book about Fenway Park and about the Boston Red Sox. And she said, would you write a nonfiction book? And I said, sure. So at that point, I put the mysteries aside and I started writing this book, Babe Ruth and the Baseball Curse, which is just a true story about Babe Ruth and the Boston Red Sox. And it took me a while to write this, but she helped me. And this book got published first. So the answer is I wrote this book first, but the earlier versions of this book, but it never got published. I wrote this book and it got published. And then we went back to this one and I revised it for a third time and finally got it to the point where it was good enough.
Good.
Yeah.
Can you describe the whole writing process with like editing and publishing and revising and
Sure. So the editing, the writing and publishing process. So the way it works for me now is that these books are published by a company called Random House in New York City. They're a big publisher, and they contract with me. We do a contract where they say we would like to buy 4 of these or 3 of these or 2 of these, and we'll pay you this amount of money, say $5,000. And the books have to be a certain length, say 10,000 words, and they have to be delivered on certain times. So once we do a contract, then I'll write the book. And as I said before, I will start, I'm going to write about the Colorado Rockies. So the first thing for me is doing research. I do whatever research I can here. Then I take a research trip. I go out to Colorado for 5 days. I do a bunch of research. I come back here and I sit down at the desk and I try to come up with a mystery. And when I'm writing the mystery, now different writers do this different ways, but when I'm sitting down to write a mystery, I usually don't know what it's going to be about. I usually don't know what the mystery is going to be. I will definitely have some ideas of things that I want to include. So for the Colorado book, I want to include the facts about the baseballs, and I know that the baseballs have to be an important part of the mystery. I know I want to include something about dinosaurs and maybe a little bit of team history, but I don't know how it's all going to fit together. And then sometimes I also have other things that I want to include, like with the Colorado book, there's actually a lot of gold mining and silver mining. And I actually went gold mining when I was out there. You go into a mine and use a pickaxe and kind of pick at the wall. That was kind of cool. And I would have loved to have included that in the book, but it just didn't fit in the story that I ended up writing. So I will kind of try to make a list of all those things that I want to write, and then just sit down and start writing. And I will try to write the first chapter and the second chapter, and I go back and revise, and I try to kind of piece it together as I go. And once, I try to come up with an outline that's really going to work. Once I have a good outline, I turn that into a story. It takes you about a month to write an outline and a month to turn it into a story. And then I submit it to my editor at the publishing company, and she'll read it and she'll send it back to me. And when it comes back to me, it has lots of changes, like hundreds of changes. So I'll get it back from them with specific changes on each line of the manuscript. And then usually a letter anywhere from 2 to 7 pages of overall suggestions of things that I need to change. So the editing process can be kind of involved. I'll get the edits back, I'll fix them all, I'll send it back to her, and then she'll send it back to me with new ones. And we go through this process about 3 times. And then once she's happy with it, it goes to another set of editors called copy editors, and they look for other types of problems with the manuscript, like factual problems or other things like that. So there's a lot of revision that goes into one of these books. Then somewhere along that process, once we've defined the story, then she will work with the illustrator. The illustrator's name is Mark Mayers, and he lives out in Utah. And she'll send him a rough draft of the book, and then she'll describe for each chapter, she'll describe the illustrations that they want. So I want a picture of Mike and Kate, in their coats talking. And usually in these books, each chapter has at least one illustration. And they also have an art director who helps work on the covers and the colors and the logos and things like that. I'm not really involved in the art. They do show it to me. So if there's a problem, I can give the feedback, but if I just don't like it, it's really kind of up to the artist. And then the publishing company puts that all together and prints the books, puts the covers on, and sends them out to bookstores and libraries. So that's really kind of a quick overview of how I do the writing and how the book gets published.
Thank you. So do you have any final things you would like to discuss or?
No, I think we've covered a lot in the questions. Those are really great questions. And it was a lot of fun to share my books with you, the Ballpark Mysteries, the MVP books, and the nonfiction books. And, one of the things that I think is a lot of fun about these books specifically is the nonfiction stuff. So, you get a little story about Mike and Kate and solving a mystery. And you also get to learn a little bit specifically about the team or the history of the team or the stadium. And for me, that's always a really interesting part of the process. So I'm happy that I was able to share this with your viewers, and I hope everyone stays safe and healthy and keeps reading books, whether they're my books or somebody else's books. I think it can be a lot of fun to kind of read books at this point and share them with other people. So thank you very much.
Thank you.